check. Okay, so we're good to go. So a warm welcome to everyone. Just a quick mention, I am full of colds, so if I suddenly stop and have a coughing fit, I'm going to mute myself and pass over to Wendy. So my name is Juliet Park and I'm here with Wendy Adeniji this evening. We're both very experienced practitioners in language teaching, primary as well as secondary. And we also run the IEL Languages scheme of work. Now, you may be using it, you may not, but it's not really relevant because tonight is really about planning grammar, whether you're setting out to do that now or whether you're already using a scheme and want to kind of analyse how the progression works if you're not overly clear. So I'm going to go straight in, and what we're going to just mention before we do go in is that Wendy and I created a book, and this was published in March of this year. Some of you may have seen it already. There is a QR code at the end, and that is called Tried and Tested, the Ultimate Guide to Teaching Primary Languages. So some of the ideas that I'm going to be showing you this evening come from that book because there's a whole section on grammar. It covers practically everything a primary teacher or primary languages coordinator would need to consider if you're introducing languages into Key Stage 2 or you want to enhance what you're already doing. So I will be dipping into ideas from that booklet as we go through. So I just want to put up the expectations. I'm not going to waffle on with this. I'd like you to just have a quick read. This kind of sets the scene along with a few other things. So if you just have a read of that, please. Okay, so since 2014, languages have been statutory, and the recommendation is that teachers schools implement one language, so there's proper planned progression in the three pillars, the three strands of language learning, which is vocabulary, phonics, and grammar, which we're going to focus on tonight. Now, they interleave quite a lot. They're not really standalone, and the way our scheme works is we focus on those three elements as we go through from year 3 to year 6. So careful planned progression is what we're going to have a look at, and hopefully this will give you ideas in how the scheme you're using is working, and certainly how Wendy and I planned the one that we have written. So I'd also like you to have a look at this. This is an Ofsted review from just over a year ago. If you just have a quick read of that. So it might be in your school or the school that you're about to training that they're quite well versed and up and running now in primary languages at Key Stage 2. However, I still go into schools, and I'm sure Wendy does, and we still see that some schools are really struggling a little bit with it. And often it's because teachers are not strong linguists, or they're not quite sure where to start. I know in my trust, where I'm a director of languages, that there are several primary schools, and the director of primary said to me last year, there's two things that primary teachers are really nervous about teaching, that's languages and RE. Another school said to me, languages and computing. So we're aware that it could be quite daunting to have to teach a language if you're not fully competent. And equally, if you have done a languages degree, but you've not been trained necessarily on how to deliver it, then you could still have some challenges along the way. And this is one of the reasons why Wendy and I wrote the book, and also the scheme we wrote is designed to support linguists of all language abilities. And certainly many of the schools and teachers that are using our scheme are actually, the teachers are learning, if you like, alongside the children. So they're developing their linguistic knowledge, their knowledge of phonics, vocabulary and grammar as they're teaching it, because the way Wendy and I have designed it is the teaching is often done by the resources. There's lots of sound files and very simple explanations and supporting notes. So hopefully training like this will support some of you who are finding this a little bit of a challenge at the moment. So let's go a little bit further forward. And we'll just have a quick look at the Key Stage 2 programme of study, particularly the elements I've highlighted in yellow. So there are various elements that we have built into our Key Stage 2 primary scheme of learning, which is available in French and Spanish. We are going to run the phonics and grammar workshops later this month in Spanish. So if you are also interested in that, or you have colleagues who are teaching Spanish, please mention that to them. So as you can see here, we are aware that in French and Spanish, we have got different genders. We've got feminine, we've got masculine. Neuter is more German, that doesn't really apply, of course, to French. And then we've got to think about the conjugation of verbs, particularly high frequency verbs, and look at key features, key grammatical structures such as negatives, comparatives, and just look at how the patterns of language work. So we've got to consider things like word order, etc. So it's very important when we're planning a scheme of work that we think about the components of grammar that we wish to teach. So what do we want to teach? What do we want to begin with? What would be the next logical building block so that children accumulate a bank of knowledge? But what's really important is it has to be sequenced in a logical way so that children can link one idea to the next, and basically it needs revisiting on a regular basis so that the children can consolidate that knowledge till they get to the point where they can use it, they can apply it, and they can manipulate it. So a lot of the grammar teaching is about scaffolding. It's about gradual introduction, modelling as well, lots of practice, revisiting till we get to the point where children can use it automatically. That's when it's transferred to their long-term memory from their working memory. So we've got to think of how do we introduce grammar? We've got to consider the age group. We've got to consider the sequence it's delivered, and how do we keep going back to it over and over again, i.e. spiral curriculum, so that children can really, really become proficient in it and then start to use it independently. Now, when we're working with young children, such as years 3 to 6, what we shouldn't be doing is using overly complex explanations. So for those of you who are familiar with full verb conjugations, what we're not going to do is introduce every component of a verb straight away. It needs to be drip fed bit by bit, so children practice before they start to look at other parts of a verb. Now, sometimes, as you'll see as we're going through the resources this evening, what we want children to do is to notice things before we start getting them to really explicitly discuss and explain and use grammar components. So sometimes, for example, in year 3, we introduce some grammar components, some elements in stories, for example, or songs, but we won't necessarily focus on the teaching of it. It's just about exposing children gradually till they start to notice, and then we come back to it at a later stage. So noticing, starting to recognize, starting to internalize, communicative approaches where children are practicing and using the language, but not necessarily independently. It's about using support mechanisms. And then as they get older and they come back to ideas over and over again, they can start to analyze them in more detail. So the lexicogrammar approach has been a very popular approach recently, and it's been popularized by people like Gianfranco Conte, who you may have heard, who advocates, and also Steve Smith, who works quite closely with him, using grammar and vocabulary in meaningful chunks, in other words, collocations, because the idea is if you bunch words together in meaningful phrases, it can accelerate the learning and remove the cognitive load of having to learn lots of separate words individually. So we do teach often in chunks and phrases. So what we're going to do now in the chat box, I'd like to see how much you understand grammar. Now, I think primary teachers are quite well versed in grammar now. Whereas 6-7 years ago, when I used to do this kind of activity, it used to throw people. So let's just see how good your grammar is. Now, you can answer these questions in either French or English, not bothered which you do, but let's see if you can give me some examples now in the chat. Can you give me an example of a definite article? This could be French or it could be English. Okay, so we've got a mix there, yes. So it is the word the, and we know in French it's le, la, les. And of course, if you have a word beginning with a vowel, then it would be L apostrophe, as Najine has put in there. And there we go. So definite articles, no complications there. What about an indefinite article? Absolutely, we've got a or an, obviously an apple, for example. And so we've got that switch to an in front of a noun with a vowel in English. And then as Alison's put there, we've got an, une, and if we're saying some, we've got des. How about a noun? I can almost guess the one that's going to come up because it comes up every time I ask this question to primary teachers. Oh, Pom, I've not had that one before. I usually get table. Oh, Ryan, yes, there you go, table. So absolutely, so we all know what nouns are, and obviously then you can categorize them even further. So we're good with nouns. And it's interesting, like Alison and various other people have put the word a in front, the un or the une, and it is good practice to learn the word a or the word the in front of the noun, because it then helps to learn the gender, which is clearly very, very important in languages like French and Spanish. How about an adjective? Primary teachers are brilliant at these. Again, we get some very, very complex and really wow type words. Here we got Lowe's coming through. And Alison, again, she's actually changed the agreements so that they are masculine and feminine. Excellent. So we know that adjectives in French obviously have to change depending on the gender of the noun. So this is something else that we start to cover, and we go further forward as we go from year 3 to year 4. How about a verb? Now, it's interesting, even at Key Stage 4, some children struggle with the concept of a verb. Okay, so we've got nice ER verbs there coming up, jouer, etc. And those are regular, but then we have got some examples, as I can see here, of high frequency, irregular verbs: to have, to go, to do, etc. And of course, the verb to be is a very, very important one. The verb to be is probably the one I find my children, certainly into secondary level, still struggle with, because it is irregular in English, not just in French. And that is the one that throws kids often. I think also when we talk about verbs, students think of them as action words, but remember, of course, to have and to be are also verbs, and they're very, very important in French. And so it's really worth stressing. It could be a verb of action, a verb of possession, to have, or a verb of being, of a state, so to be. How about an adverb? These are a great way for children, obviously, to extend their sentences. Can we think of adverbs? Excellent. So obviously the ly in English, slowly, quickly, suddenly, is reproduced in French with the ment, such as Karen and Alison's idea there, lentement, doucement. Okay, so an adverb is a great way of adding further information. What about a subject pronoun? So obviously je is a very important one. And obviously, logically, we would start teaching a verb using the je, and then we would bring in other parts. The tu is good because it helps you ask the children questions. And then, as we've got from Najine and Victoria, the il and the l. And so what we've done is we approach verbs in chunks. We start with the I, then the you, then the he and she. And then, as Lauren's got there, the nous and the vous, those come in much later in our scheme. What about a conjunction? We call them connectives in secondary. Okay, so some key ones there: and, but, also, excellent. And then as children get older into 5 and 6, we might bring in things like however, on the other hand, par contre, etc. Cependant. Okay, so remember those are your connecting words to help children build their sentence and extend their ideas into one sentence. And car and parce que are obviously key ones as well. This one throws teachers. I've done this even with GCSE teachers, and sometimes I get the wrong answer. Do we know? Oh, Adriana, you're straight in there, Adriana. Possessive adjectives are the word for my, and again, they have to change depending on the gender of the noun. So you've got the mon, ma, me. Now, often when we're looking at things like this, Wendy and I've put songs into this scheme because singing them can help children learn things like the mon, ma, me, the words for my. And you've got notre. Well done, Karen. Okay, so thank you for that quick grammar check. So in our book, what we've done is we've grouped some ideas of grammar functions together. So if you were ever not clear, in chapter 8, I think it is, of our book, you can see examples in English, French and Spanish of how grammar works and some ideas. That's not an exhaustive list. It's the basic things, for example, that we would cover in Key Stage 2, the main things that we wish to cover. Now, when we're planning, as we've mentioned earlier, it's very important to sequence the grammar in a logical way. We do not want to cause cognitive overload, and we have to think about how to make the grammar accessible. As we mentioned earlier, we don't want to bog children down with complex tables of full verb conjugations. We don't want to teach too much too soon. So it's drip fed and it's practiced. We immerse them, we flood them through using lots of different examples. So it could be a story, it could be a song, it could be a video, it could be a tongue twister, etc. We use lots of different ways to revisit the same ideas so that children are seeing the same thing over and over again, but we approach it over a sequence of lessons in different ways to keep that sense of enthusiasm. And clearly we want to use things that are going to be interesting to children of that age. So the context is really important so that children can link into the ideas and that they feel engaged. We use a lot of techniques such as Kagan techniques and singing, lots of choral repetition so they can repeat even if the teacher is using the PowerPoint to play the sound. But we want children to be very engaged and very active when they're learning. So we've got to think about the age group and we've got to think about the context. If we look at some examples, for example, from year 3, we've used some basic stories like Aladdin and his 3 wishes. When you look at year 6, we've looked at how children live around the world. So cultural capital is also very important. And again, a great way to introduce and reinforce grammar. So we're just going to have a look now, moving towards year 3, and then we're going to actually work up and look at some examples. So we go from year 3 to year 6. So you can see here in year 3, the gender's important, the adjectival endings are important, and also the word order. And then you've got the definite and indefinite articles. You've got I am, I have. And what we felt when we were writing the scheme is that je voudrais, often considered a complex phrase because it's a different tense, it's conditional, often thought to be complex. We thought that is a very easy one to introduce. So we brought that in year 3. Then you can see in year 4, children learn basic opinion phrases such as I like, and then they start to learn the negative forms. So I don't like. They look into further adjectival agreements, and then we're moving them from I am and I have to he is, he has and she has, etc. So you can see then how we're dropping different parts of a verb in. In year 5, we look again at avoir and être, to be and to have, and we start then to bring other parts in, such as we. In year 4, as we mentioned earlier, possessive such as my, mon, ma, me, we can then start to look at his and her. And year 5 also, we bring in a new tense. We bring in the simple future And then in year 6, we go right through the full verbs of to have and to be. We introduce the verb to go. It's introduced in year 5, and we come back to it in its full paradigm, the full conjugation in year 6. We also look at je peux, which is what's known as a modal verb, and children can use that in many contexts. I can plus infinitive. And we bring some very simple past tense phrases in. So that, if you like, is a bit of an overview. It doesn't cover absolutely everything, but it gives you a key indication. What we know is really important is that they revisit this grammar across different contexts and different topics, because sometimes a criticism of language learning is that children learn a particular grammar element or even vocab in a topic, and then they struggle to transfer that to other areas of the curriculum or other topics. So it's really important that we spiral, weave those ideas back in over and over again, but we use them in different contexts. Now, in terms of planning, we have 3 different types of planning. So this one is just a screenshot, a clip out of our year 3 to 6. This is the overview that shows what happens in each year group, years 3 to 6 across each half term. And Wendy might want to comment at some point on this because she's had Ofsted inspector training. They might want to see or talk to you about how your planning works. So there we've got the overview for the 4 year groups. This one is based on 1 year group. So this is taken from our year 3, and this is lesson by lesson overview. And then this would be an example of an actual lesson plan. So if an Ofsted inspector said, what would I expect to see if I went into a lesson? These documents could be really useful. Wendy, do you want to chip in at all?
Yeah, so I don't know if people who are listening are aware of the 3 pillars of language learning, which are considered to be very important now. They came out of the Ofsted Research Review in Languages from June 2021. It's definitely worth Googling that and getting a copy of it. Even if you don't read the full document, read the sort of executive summary at the front. And so some Ofsted inspector training notes for primary MFL have now been released recently, and inspectors are going to be all over your 3 pillars, wanting to know what your progression looks like in both phonics and vocabulary, and obviously at the session that we're looking at today in grammar. So they will want to look at your progression and want to know how things become more difficult. And I would say verbs is one of the particular areas that you can talk about in terms of different types of verb, different tenses and so on, and how much of the full verb paradigm you teach. That would be a good one to focus on, I would suggest.
So this example, as we've got the lesson plan here, you can see at the top, it's revising the difference between the un, une, le, la, les, okay? Now, what's really important is we don't focus on difficult explanations to start with. So this is actually, later in the scheme, we have 30 lessons per scheme. This is around lesson 21, 22. So the children have already seen un, une, etc., le, la, but they're color coded, and we don't go into detailed explanations until much later on. So by this time, they're starting to notice grammar, but we don't want to bog them down with an explanation until they can start to say, well, this is what I'm noticing. And so by then, they should be able to access and understand it a lot more. Okay, so this is an example of where our children will be by the end of year 3. I'll let you have a quick read in either language, and then we'll look at what's included in those example sentences. So we've got greetings, we've got the introduction of my name is, we look at how to introduce one's age. And for those of you who are confident French linguists, we know that in French we have to go, I have 7 years, not I am. So we do look at linguistic differences. Voici is a very, very easy word to introduce a noun with an article. So we decided to put that in year 3, voici, here is. And that just means that the children can actually create a meaningful sentence without putting anything else in front of it. So voici, very easy for them to start very early on in around lessons 3 or 4, saying, here is, for example, a small white cat. Now, you probably noticed that we've got more than one adjective surrounding each noun. And what's important is obviously word order. We know that most adjectives come after a noun in French, but where we've got 2, we can link them with an and there are a few adjectives that have to come before the noun. And so we start to introduce these, and these will happen automatically over time because children are using adjectives right through the scheme. We've also got the j'aime, I like, so we're bringing an opinion. And then we've got the je voudrais, as we mentioned earlier. Wendy, could you look at the chat as we're going through? So let's have a look at how we might teach. Now, we couldn't spend in the next half an hour or so the opportunity to introduce every single element we use, but we're just going to dip in and look at some ideas. So this would be using several animals. The children hear the sound and they have to write what they hear. So mini whiteboards are an absolutely brilliant item, a resource for formative assessment for learning in the classroom, and we strongly advocate having a set if you haven't already. So simple listening, and then what happens is from the noun, as we mentioned, we bring the voici in, and often what we've put is at the top of the slide, you will see icons that feature right through the scheme to say whether the children should listen and repeat, whether they should be writing on whiteboards, etc. So we can see here we've got the snake, and now we're bringing in the colour. And then we move quite briskly onto then adding more than one noun and linking it with the conjunction and. Then we bring in more and more, and we're bringing in now 2 colours as opposed to 1. So you can see we've gone very quickly from a very short phrase to a longer sentence.
Un lapin, mais...
Now this is just an example of a story where the children are using other parts of verbs, etc. And the way that stories work in our scheme is we use a lot of visual clues, a huge amount of repetition. Now, I know some of my primaries in my trust have gone and just grabbed things off the internet, off YouTube. When I've heard them, the sound and the speed and the accent, the intonation is not ideal for young children, and there isn't enough repetition. Now, we know, and you'll know as primary teachers, that stories are a very, very powerful way to teach. And by using lots of repetition, we can really help to reinforce the grammar, the phonics and the vocabulary.
Il est bizarre.
And if you're familiar with Talk for Writing, this is a great approach, and we come back to this at various points in the scheme to help children text map and start to read stories back, start to narrate them back, and they gradually start to use the visuals instead of the words. This one is an example again from year 3. We've got I am, je suis, and this is just to reinforce nouns. Now, we're not explicitly teaching je suis at this point. This is where we start to give them some familiarity, but we come back in much more depth later on in year 4. Again, you've got the je suis there, and we're bringing in more nouns in French. The conditional, the je voudrais, is brought in around 22, and this is just a great way to replace j'adore, j'aime, I like, I love with just je voudrais. So again, it's a great way for children to learn and replace some of the words, some of the verbs that they've used. We regularly dip in and out of board games, so a dice and children with a board game, these could be laminated. These are a great way for children to practice saying the sounds. And of course, by this point, every time they do this, they've had so much exposure, listening to the language that's built into the resources, practicing them, repeating over and over again. And so that independent group work, that collaborative work, can be a great way for children to feel confident and good about using the language. Now, that's just a simple sentence builder. What Wendy and I have done is, over the years, we've gone back into our scheme and we've further enhanced it. We've now got a differentiated resource scheme, a duplicate pack of resources. So it's the same as the standard, but it's got resources that support more able and less able. But also one of the reasons we did it, and you might be in this situation, is that you have got mixed year groups. And that obviously can present a challenge in itself. So sometimes some of the sentence builders have got QR codes, because we're aware that some schools have got iPads. So children can actually go and work independently. And sentence builders is just one way we might do that with a QR code. So let's move up a year now, end of year 4. I won't speak for a minute. I'll just let you analyse the text, and we'll have a quick look at what we've built in and how we might teach. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that's obviously a full paragraph. It doesn't mean to say that children would write that in one go. At the end of every year scheme, we have assessments in reading, writing, speaking, listening. And we've also got age-related expectations. What would we expect an average child to be able to do by the end of each year group? And we've also got self-assessment sheets. That's something I am aware that some schools are using. So can you give a greeting? Can you say how old you are, etc.? Can you give a physical description? So if we just look at the difference from year 3 to 4, again, we've got the salutation, the greeting, we've got the age. Now we're bringing in the birthday because we're introducing numbers up to 30. We've got height, we've got colours again, but this time instead of describing colours of animals, it's describing hair and eyes. So you can see how we're recycling the vocabulary, the adjectives. Family members we're bringing in. We're bringing in, again, colours to do with items of clothing. We've got the opinions, we've got the linking words, we're adding more now, and we bring in sweets, etc. Okay, and food. So that's gives you an idea. So let's just have a look at how we might teach in year 4. So this example is, if you're aware of this, a quiz trade Kagan activity. Because children's pronunciation is now in the majority fairly secure, what we would do is we use these quiz trade activities in various ways. It could be that they're given to cards and children go round and test each other in the room because we like them to be active and out of the seats. Equally, it could be that this is differentiated and that children work in pairs, one with the back to the board, one facing the board, and they test each other, and then they test each other from French to English and then English to French. There's lots of practice activities, and you can see here we're practicing at the beginning of year 4 the actual animal nouns and the opinion phrases, positive and negative. I like, I love, I would like, I don't like, I hate, etc. So in year 4, this is when the children start to really practice I am and I have. And you can see this is ideal because we're wanting now to bring physical descriptions. And so this would be an appropriate point to bring I am, I have. And what we want to do is to enable children to become more and more confident and more independent over time. So in year 4, we start to have discrete activities throughout the scheme in using dictionaries. We do advocate one particular dictionary, we analysed them, we felt this one. Is it Collins, Wendy? Remember which one it was?
No, it's the Oxford First Learners French and First Learners Spanish, and there's a 2-for-1 discount with the iLanguages code as well.
I wonder if you could pop that in the chat box because I can't remember what the code is. I don't know if you know. So what we want to do is to get children to understand how to use reference materials. What's lovely about this particular dictionary is it supports cultural capital. So sometimes on the pages, there's some lovely little explanations of things to do with festivals, for example, or traditions. So you can see here now we're really starting to think about the definite article, the le, la. Okay, so you can see how we're coming back to this, but now we're starting to really teach it explicitly using a dictionary. We also have a workbooklet that we dip in and out of every couple of lessons. So you can see here, we're moving from the I am and I have to he has and she has, etc. So we do that by focusing on monsters. We've got the lovely Three Bears story here. This is another way to reinforce the je suis. And then this activity, so I should have put this one before, this is to do with food, it's to do with days of the week, and you've obviously got the verb mange, to eat. Now, I found this really, really effective with learners. I've seen learners actually use this model where they've seen a story of a monster and what he eats each day. It's repetitive all the way through, so it's not overly difficult. And then this is, I suppose, a taught for writing type activity where you're replacing some of the words, some of the nouns with pictures. And this would be also accompanied by a taught for writing video. So if you wanted the children to learn the actions as well, you can watch a video. It's actually me doing it. So I'm not a native speaker, but it's just to give you that reinforcement if you're not confident about leading a speaking activity. And of course, the teachers can stand in the classroom alongside the children to reenact and repeat. Again, we've got another simple sentence builder to describe height, to describe hair and eyes, reinforcing again the je suis and j'ai, the I am and I have. So now let's dip into the end of year 5. Again, I'll let you have a quick read of either language or both. I'll give you a minute to have a look. Okay, so you can see familiar language and new language woven in. So again, a greeting, saying one's age, one's name. Instead of birthday, actually saying what date it is. We've got a weather phrase there. We talk about how we get to school. So we've introduced forms of transport. We've talked about favourite subjects, so we're bringing in school, linking with more adjectives such as because it's interesting, and again another opinion in the negative, saying they don't like maths because it's complicated. Now we've also brought items in the classroom in because these are a great way to say where things are located. So we bring prepositions of place such as on, under, next to, and it's great for children to use some of the items they have on the desk to move things around in accordance with under, above, next to, etc. We've got music and playing cards, so we start to bring hobbies and free time in. And then in terms of clothing, which they saw in year 4, we bring this in to do with what they wear for playing some of the sports as well as school uniform. We've introduced at this stage the verb to go by talking about how you go to school, how you go on holiday, and then towards the end of year 5, we link the verb to go to use it with another verb to make the what's called the near future. So I'm going to go, I'm going to play, I'm going to eat. And again, we start to look at a few other parts of that verb. Okay, we've got the I would, again, we've got the conditional, and you can see we're bringing in adverbs, and we've got also more adjectives. So it really does help the children to rely and link into prior learning and build on that previous knowledge in stepping stones. So what we've got here are some slides, but they're also used as verb cards. You can see now we've gone to you have, so we've done the I have, you have, he, she has, we have. Now we're starting to gradually bring in other parts of the verb, and we're looking obviously at items that they already are aware of. So it's not topic specific. We're looking at different topics. So the first example is looking at pets. The second example is looking at clothing and colours. And again, in the work booklet, children get a chance to show what they know. So if you had people coming in, parents, Ofsted or anyone that wanted to see the progress, those booklets are a really lovely way to show progression across the year group, but also across the key stages as well. Now, on the left here, that's another example of the work booklets. What you've got there are the children use their dictionary to actually search for new adjectives, and these adjectives link to the Emperor's New Clothes story. So this is a really good one to reinforce the I have, etc. Really lovely story to do with clothes, to do with adjectives, and the illustrations are fantastic in these stories. They're quite engaging. Now, as we're moving on, what we're looking at then is once children understand the I have, he has, she has, then we bring in negatives, and that brings a grammar point. And as you can see here now, we're going to a bit more of a pattern explanation. Now, as the children get into the later stages of Key Stage 2, they can manage a little bit more complexity. So we do go into more explanations, the use of tables, etc. in year 5 and 6. What we've got here then is we introduce regular ER verbs. So you can see on the left, we've got danser, to listen, to dance, to eat, to watch, to walk, and to jump. We have little animations. We have lots of songs where children can do the actions to really reinforce some of those grammar points. So regular ER verbs are brought in at this point. Again, they dip into the work booklet and they go then back into the dictionary, not looking at adjectives this time, but looking at verbs. And this is an example again of prepositions. I mentioned that earlier, so we revisit that idea. I just want to mention something. This really surprised me actually, is that girl there is at a primary school in Bordeaux, and we did some filming there, so we do have authentic video clips. And that girl was walking through her classroom and she actually went through the verb conjugations for to be and to have. Now, I was quite surprised by this because I presumed that we learn full verb conjugations, such as in that photo, as English people learning French. What I didn't realise is that French people learn verb conjugations in the same way. So they have the full conjugation, the full paradigms of verbs like to be and to have on the walls. And the French teacher said, well, we have to learn it that way because unlike English, we have to learn verbs like this. This is how we learn. So it's not just people learning French as foreigners, but actually French people learn in the same way. Just a quick question to throw you back into the chat box. For regular verbs in English, there is only one part that changes. Can you tell me which it is? So if you've got the verb to dance, to listen, to sing, there's only one bit that is different. Which one is it in English? It is, Ellen, absolutely. So if you think I dance, you dance, he, she, it dances. So it's no wonder we don't have to learn verbs like other languages because they're very simple in, well, regular. Most verbs are regular in the present tense in English. To be, as we mentioned earlier, is the one that causes most problems. Okay, so what we've got is a couple more ideas here. So we've got the supermarket story on the left. So the rabbit goes to the supermarket to buy a cake. That is one great way to introduce the full verb of to go. The verb to go is revisited with the Cinderella story, as you can see on the left in the middle there. And then we've got card games again to introduce again the full paradigm, the full conjugation of the verb to aller. And on the right, as we mentioned earlier, we can go into more explanation. Sorry, I'm missing the accents. I am aware of the word television in the middle there, but you can see how we look at pattern spotting, because as children become more mature and more confident in the language, they're able to access this kind of resource. And that's where we would expect them to be by the end of year 6, not in one assessment, but just have a quick scan. I didn't want to fit both languages on, but if you just have a look, it will give you some indication. Okay, so you can see some familiar phrases, some familiar information that they've been practicing since year 3. We've got the adjectives, we've got the opinions, we've got the linking words. But what's new here in year 6 is they're using I went and it was. We teach those as set phrases. We don't go into too much detail because that can be covered later in Key Stage 3. We bring in houses. What children absolutely love in year 6 is we have photos of celebrities' houses, and they absolutely love to explore the differences and where they're located and what they look like. Of course, you've got the colours, you've got the adjectives again, you've got the I would like. We bring in daily routine, we've got times of day, we've got food items that we revisit, we've got the school, the transport, the clothes, the colours, the school subjects, which were of course covered in year 5, and we talk about other people, not just ourselves. So in that penultimate paragraph, my brother loves French and Spanish, for example. So they're using different parts of the verb. And then to finish off, you can see we're bringing I'm going to eat. Okay, so we've got that near future, applying it in a slightly different context, and then finishing off with it will be. So I went, it was, it will be, I'm going to are the key things that we revisit, or rather teach and really reinforce at the end of year 6. Now, I know when I've shown this to primary schools in the past, they are like, wow, how on earth are we going to get children to get to that level? We can't obviously take one massive jump. This takes 4 years, as we've seen, of very carefully scaffolded teaching and drip feeding of information, revisiting, and then gradually building on the layers of complexity at the point where children can start to handle more. So very quickly, a last couple of things to show you, and then we'll take questions. This is a story which includes every bit of to have and to be. So we've used, again, stories and gap fills. That is what we call, what do they call these, Wendy? I've forgotten. We've got that many names. What do we call them?
That's a trapdoor activity or a cloud activity.
That's it, trapdoor cloud. So these are really good when children are excellent speakers. So we do lots of practice and then they play a game. It's a bit like Grandma Went to Market, if you've not done it before, and they have to try and memorize and say everything that their partner has said. If they say one of the clouds wrong, they have to pass over to the other learner. So lots of speaking activities. I'll miss that one because I'm just so aware of time. This is a speaking ladder, and again, these comes particularly in the differentiator resources with QR codes. And what the idea is here is children are practicing a key pattern. So in here, we've got the I can, je peux, and we keep coming back to it. That's obviously a higher level one. And the children can work really well in pairs because it's a very, very well supported, independent type of activity. And the idea is with this, for example, is they fold it in half and one child could read out the French and their partner could say what the English is, and they go, and if they get one wrong, they swap over. And then they keep going up and they keep swapping over. The idea is they go right to the top and then they come all the way back down. Now, clearly that's quite challenging, but again, because they've practiced everything in there over time and gradually built that the layers of complexity, many of them are now able to manage that kind of language level. This is an example of the past tense. We don't overly complicate it. We just stick to I went, it was, and ER verbs. And we just teach several words, high frequency verbs. I played, I watched, and we use I and we because children like to talk not just about themselves, but about what they do with their families and their friends. So nous is a really good one to introduce. And with 3 minutes, does anybody have any questions? And does Wendy want to chip in and add anything extra?
Yeah, so to answer some of the questions that came up in the chat, Mila, apologies for the pronunciation, asked about how do you evidence SMSC. So we do that in a variety of ways, and a couple of them in particular are around the cultural video clips, which are set in Bordeaux in the French version and Alicante in the Spanish, where you see children at home, at school, going to the market, the restaurant. So you see very cultural contexts there. So that would be the cultural side. In terms of the moral and spiritual, we have some really nice activities around children's bedrooms all over the world. And you can see the differences in lifestyle. You can see a boy from the Ivory Coast, which is French speaking, La Côte d'Ivoire, and you can see he's got one toy, and you compare that with children in the Western Hemisphere who have a lot more. So there's quite a lot around SMSC. Would the children write this independently? It would depend on everything that you've done in terms of leading up to it. If you've modelled it really well, if you've done lots of practice with mini whiteboards, then they probably could, but you might give some writing mats or some sentence builders to children who need extra support. I would suggest it all depends on the particular children in your class and how much work you've done with them. But if you do a lot of practice work with them, then it's very possible. I've certainly seen it in classrooms that I've been to that recently in year 4 and 5, where children have been able to write really well independently.
Oh, Wendy, you might want to mention the knowledge organisers, because I can see people like such as Ryan asking about independent work. We've added those, haven't we, recently? Yeah,
we have knowledge organisers now for all 4 of the schemes for each year group. Do these resources come in the book? No, the resources are separate. You can go onto the Our Languages website. If you've not come across it before, you can get some free samples to trial it. But the book does reference the materials. And the book is called, have we got, if you can take a photo of the QR code, but the book is called Tried and Tested, The Ultimate Guide to Primary Languages. If you just go into Amazon and put in my name, for example, or Juliet's name, I don't know how, I know my name's unusual, so it'll certainly come up with my name. I don't know if there's any other Juliet Parks in the world, or who've written a book. So I don't know.
There is a Korean woman keeps popping up. I think she's a professor, because I keep being approached about my academic work. I'm thinking, no, it's not me.
Okay, I think hopefully I've answered. I did put in the chat the links to the French and the Spanish Oxford University Press First Learners Dictionary, which we really like. We researched and we particularly like this, and they've allowed us to use screenshots of their dictionaries from the book in our resources. So if you couldn't afford to buy the actual dictionaries, there's quite a few screenshots that you can either print them out for the children or they can look at them on the screen. So they will be doing some of that bilingual dictionary work, which is part of what the national curriculum does expect. But if you can afford to buy them, they normally cost £8.99, but you get them for half price with the code that I put in the chat as well.
Might be worth answering. Sarah's asking about the amount of time it takes to get through our scheme, and there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. So first of all, the individual lesson plans have a kind of key component expected to be covered, not necessarily in one lesson, because every primary school seems to be different. You've got 20 minutes in one school, half an hour in another, 40 minutes in another. You've got visiting peripatetic teachers, you've got form teachers who can do a little bit in registration time. So we try to keep it really flexible. And the other thing to mention is we don't call the schemes and the work booklets year 3, 4, 5, 6. We rename them stage 1, 2, 3 or 4, I think it was, wasn't it, Wendy? So that it doesn't look odd if you have to use the year 3 in year 4, for example, or you've got mixed year groups. Nobody would question why that would be the case. And we also get teachers saying, I'd like to introduce this scheme. Can I get years 3, 4, 5 and 6? And we say, please do not start teaching, for example, with 5 and 6 if your children aren't already at a reasonable level, because it would be too much for them. It would be better to start with 3 and 4 and maybe just kind of skip some of the activities but focus on some of the main ones. Anything to add, Wendy, on that?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. You can go more quickly. So if you started a year 5 class with the year 3 materials, you'd probably go through it twice as quickly, because obviously the children will pick things up much more quickly.
Manfred's asking about German. Manfred, we would love to do a scheme in German. The problem is we've written a lot of secondary resources in German and so few schools wanted them that we couldn't really, we struggled to cover the costs. So unfortunately at this stage, no, sorry Manfred, I wish there was. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now and we will bring that to a close. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. You've been absolutely amazing. And if you have any questions, you can contact hello@iLanguages. I'll just pop that in the chat. Or you could go onto our website and you will receive a link to this video recording at some point soon. And remember, we've got some Spanish ones coming up, so please keep an eye on our website should you have colleagues that might be interested in looking at the other language. Thank you to everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.